The pyramids of Giza stand as a timeless mystery. How did an ancient civilization, without any modern tools, build these colossal structures with such breathtaking precision? We are about to explore 25 specific ancient Egyptian technologies so advanced they seem to defy their own time. By the end, you will understand the true genius hidden behind the sand and stone. We will uncover how they kept time with water, performed complex surgeries, and even built with a form of concrete. What forgotten secrets of human ingenuity do you think are still buried beneath the desert? The sides of the Great Pyramid face north, south, east, and west with a precision that feels impossible. Its north-south axis is misaligned by an error of just 3/60ths of a single degree. For a structure built over 4,000 years ago, this accuracy is not just impressive, it is almost supernatural. How did ancient surveyors without magnetic compasses or satellite GPS achieve such a feat? The answer lies in their profound connection to the sky. One compelling theory suggests they used a pair of circumpolar stars. By sighting on two stars that never set, like Kochab and Mizar in the bowl of the Little Dipper, they could trace a perfect north-south line on the ground. Another method might have used a simple gnomon, a vertical rod, to track the sun's shadow. By marking the shadow's arc throughout the day, the shortest shadow would point directly north. This celestial alignment was not merely an architectural flourish. It was fundamental to their entire worldview. The Egyptians believed their pharaoh's soul would ascend to join the imperishable stars, the circumpolar ones that eternally circled the pole. A pyramid perfectly aligned with the cosmos was a divine machine, a launch pad for eternity. This was a level of engineering sophistication that would not be seen again in the world for millennia. But that celestial precision was not just carved in stone. It was also recorded on a medium so revolutionary it would shape human civilization for thousands of years. While the pyramids reached for the heavens, another technology captured the thoughts of the living. The ancient Egyptians invented the world's first paper, papyrus, and their method was a masterpiece of bioengineering. They did not simply flatten a plant and write on it. The process was incredibly sophisticated. It began with the papyrus plant, a tall reed that grew in abundance along the Nile. Workers would harvest these plants and carefully cut the fibrous inner pith, the core of the stalk, into long, thin strips. These strips were then soaked in water, sometimes for days, to make them pliable and to activate their natural glues. The real genius came in the pressing. The wet strips were laid out side by side to form one layer. Then, a second layer was placed directly on top, but with all the strips running perpendicular to the first. This cross-hatched pattern created a natural grid. This double layer was then hammered together, pressed, and left to dry under a heavy weight. As it dried, the plant's own sap acted as a powerful adhesive, bonding the layers into a single, incredibly strong yet flexible sheet. The final step was to polish the surface with a smooth stone or piece of ivory, creating a perfect, smooth writing surface. This was not just paper, it was the birth of the scroll. For the first time in history, a civilization had a portable, relatively cheap, and highly durable writing medium. Bureaucrats could keep detailed tax records and census data. Scribes could copy stories, poems, and medical texts. The entire machinery of the state, from grain allocations to military orders, could now be documented, stored, and transported with an efficiency never before possible. This single invention fueled their bureaucracy and preserved their culture for 3,000 years, proving that some of the most powerful technologies are not monuments of stone, but the very things we use to record our words. Yet with all the power of their written records, the Egyptians still faced a fundamental challenge that no scroll could solve. The life-giving waters of the Nile did not flow everywhere. How could a farmer water crops on land high above the riverbank? The solution was a device of beautiful, practical simplicity, the shaduf. This was not a complex machine, but its design was a stroke of pure genius. Picture a long pole like a seesaw balanced on an upright frame. On one end hung a bucket and on the other a heavy counterweight made of mud and stone. A single person could pull the rope to lower the bucket into the river. Then the counterweight would do most of the work, effortlessly lifting the full bucket high into the air. With a simple push, the farmer could then swing the pole around to pour the water into an irrigation canal. This counterweight mechanism transformed back-breaking labor into a manageable task. One person could now lift thousands of gallons of water a day, reaching fields that were once barren and dry. The impact of this simple tool was nothing short of revolutionary. For the first time, farmers were not solely at the mercy of the Nile's annual flood. They could irrigate their land on demand. This meant they could grow multiple harvests each year instead of just one. It allowed for the cultivation of a wider variety of crops, including more water-intensive fruits and vegetables. With a stable, abundant food supply, the population could grow and society could become more complex. The shaduf did not just water crops, it watered the very roots of civilization, enabling the surplus of food that freed people to become artisans, priests, and builders. This humble irrigation device, operated by countless farmers along the river, was a quiet engine of empire. That same practical ingenuity that lifted water from the river was also applied to the human body with medical knowledge that seems to leap across millennia. We have a direct window into their methods through the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a medical text so advanced it reads like an ancient emergency room manual. This was not a collection of magic spells, but a systematic scientific document. It details 48 cases of injuries from head wounds to spinal fractures, organized from the head down. For each case, the papyrus provides a logical structure, the examination, the diagnosis, and a practical treatment. The text reveals a stunning understanding of human anatomy. It describes the brain's surface, noting for the first time in history the connection between a head injury and paralysis on the opposite side of the body. It instructs physicians on how to stitch wounds with a needle and thread, how to set broken bones using splints and bandages stiffened with plaster, and even how to use raw meat to stop bleeding on the first day, a primitive but logical antiseptic dressing. This was medicine based on observation and reason, not superstition, but their medical mastery did not stop at repairs. They also pioneered the art of replacement. On the foot of a female mummy, archaeologists discovered a carefully crafted wooden toe. This was no symbolic offering for the afterlife. It was a functional prosthetic sculpted to fit the woman's foot with remarkable care. The device shows clear signs of wear and was even refitted several times, proving it was used during her lifetime. Its design reveals an early grasp of biomechanics, the way the body moves. The toe was hinged, allowing it to bend naturally with each step, and it was shaped for comfort and utility, enabling her to walk with greater stability. This simple piece of carved wood represents a profound leap in thought. It shows the Egyptians saw disability not as a curse, but as a problem to be solved with engineering and compassion. They were not just healing the body, they were actively restoring its lost functions, a concept that feels remarkably modern. So how did these medical artisans acquire such precise knowledge of the body's inner workings, and what other secrets did they unlock by looking within? Their knowledge of anatomy was matched only by their mastery of time itself. The same civilization that could restore a human gait also sought to measure the very passage of the hours, day and night. When the sun set and shadow clocks became useless, the Egyptians turned to a more elemental force, water. Their solution was the clepsydra, a water clock of elegant simplicity. Imagine a stone vessel with a small, precisely drilled hole near the bottom and a series of measured marks carved on its inner wall. As water steadily dripped out, the lowering water level would pass each mark, indicating that another hour of the night had elapsed. This was not a simple bucket with a leak. The design was brilliant because it accounted for the changing length of night hours throughout the year. The marks inside the vessel were not evenly spaced. In the winter, when nights were longer, the marks for the nighttime hours were placed farther apart. This compensated for the slower drip rate, ensuring that each measured interval truly represented 1/12 of the night, regardless of the season. This was an early form of variable timekeeping, a concept that would not be fully readdressed for centuries, but their vision of time stretched far beyond the nightly hours. They were also observing a grander celestial clockwork. Every year, just before the Nile's life-giving flood, the star Sirius would reappear in the dawn sky after a 70-day absence. This event, known as the Heliacal Rising, was their New Year's Day. The Egyptians tracked this cycle with such care that they realized their traditional lunar calendar of 360 days drifted out of sync with the solar year. So they fixed it. They established a new calendar of 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 extra days added at the end. This was the world's first recognizable solar calendar, and its accuracy was staggering compared to anything else in the ancient world. It was only off by about 1/4 of a day each year. This Egyptian calendar would later be adapted by the Romans to form the Julian calendar, which then evolved into the Gregorian system we use today. Every time you glance at a date, you are seeing the legacy of an ancient astronomer who watched for a star's return over the Nile. They did not just build for eternity in stone, they also encoded it in the steady flow of water and the predictable dance of the stars. While their calendar tracked the slow turn of the stars, their buildings were made to defy time itself. We often credit the Romans with the invention of concrete, but the evidence is carved into the very blocks of the Great Pyramid. The ancient Egyptians developed their own incredibly durable concrete, a secret recipe that allowed their monuments to stand for millennia. They created complex mortars from lime and gypsum, mixing these binders with water, sand, and rubble to form a stone-like mass. What is truly remarkable is the chemistry they unlocked. Their lime mortar was not just a simple glue. By heating limestone to a high temperature, they produced quicklime, which, when mixed with water, undergoes a chemical reaction that causes it to harden and even grow stronger over centuries. This is the same fundamental process used in modern cement. In the pyramids, this mortar was not merely used as a filler between giant stone blocks. In many cases, it was poured into wooden molds to create cast blocks in situ, a form of early pre-cast construction. The result is a bond so perfect that you cannot slide a razor blade between some of the stones, even after 4,500 years. This was not a public technology. The precise formula for this supernatural glue was a state secret guarded as fiercely as any pharaoh's treasure. The knowledge was power, literally the power to shape eternity. If the wrong mixture was used, a pyramid could crumble in a generation. But with the correct alchemy of lime, gypsum, and water, they created a man-made stone that could endure the weight of ages. This ancient concrete is why we can still walk in the shadows of their achievements today. It makes you wonder, what other foundational inventions have we misattributed, their origins lost beneath the dust of older, wiser civilizations? That same concrete which gave their monuments permanence also needed a language to last just as long. Etched into those timeless stones is one of humanity's most intricate and beautiful writing systems, hieroglyphs. We often mistake these elegant symbols as simple picture writing, but their true nature is a technological marvel of information processing. Hieroglyphs were a sophisticated fusion of different sign types working in harmony. Some symbols, called logograms, represented entire words or ideas. A simple drawing of the sun could mean the sun itself or the concept of a day, but the system also contained the seeds of an alphabet. Alongside those word pictures were phonetic signs that represented consonant sounds, allowing scribes to spell out words phonetically just as we do. And then there were determinatives, silent symbols placed at the end of a word to clarify its meaning and prevent ambiguity. Think of it this way: if you were writing the word bark in English, you might use a picture of a tree after it to show you mean a tree's bark, or a picture of a dog to show you mean a dog's bark. This three-part system gave scribes an incredibly flexible and precise tool. They could record everything from the dry details of a grain shipment for a temple warehouse to the most profound poetry about the journey of the soul. This was not art for art's sake, it was a powerful administrative engine. The ability to write a royal decree and have it read exactly as intended by an official hundreds of miles away was a revolutionary form of control. It meant laws could be standardized, taxes could be assessed fairly, and the will of the pharaoh could be felt in every corner of the empire. This precise transmission of complex information was the invisible framework that held a vast civilization together for 3,000 years, proving that the most durable technology is sometimes not the stone but the story carved upon it. The precise language carved in stone was matched by an equally precise science practiced on the human body itself. Mummification was far more than a spiritual rite. It was a sophisticated biochemical procedure that halted decay for millennia. The entire process was a carefully choreographed operation that unfolded over 70 days, demonstrating an intimate and practical knowledge of anatomy and chemistry. It began with the most invasive step, the removal of the internal organs. The brain was carefully extracted, often through the nose using long, hooked bronze tools. The heart, believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion, was usually left in place. Other organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, were removed through an incision in the side, then meticulously cleaned, dehydrated, and stored in special ceremonial jars. With the organs removed, the real work of preservation could begin. The body cavity was rinsed with palm wine, a natural antiseptic, and then packed with bags of a special salt called natron. This was the masterstroke. Natron is a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, salt, and sodium sulfate found in dry lake beds. The body was then completely covered in these natron salts and left to dry for 40 days. This was not a simple drying process, it was a chemical transformation. The natron drew all the moisture out of the tissues, dissolving body fats and leaving the skin and muscles shrunken, leathery, and completely inhospitable to the bacteria that caused decay. After this long dehydration, the desiccated body was washed again. Then came the anointing, a process that sealed the preservation. The skin was rubbed with luxurious oils and resins like cedar resin and juniper oil, which had natural antibacterial properties. The body cavity was often packed with linen, sawdust, or more natron, and sometimes the skin itself was coated in a heated resin that hardened into a protective shell. Finally, the body was wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen strips, with amulets placed between the layers for spiritual protection. Every step, from the choice of natron to the application of resins, was a deliberate chemical intervention. They were not praying for the body to last, they were engineering it. This was a technology born from centuries of observation and experimentation, a testament to their understanding that eternity was not a gift from the gods alone, but something that could be built layer by layer with salt and science. While their chemical arts preserved the human body, their civil engineering was busy reshaping the very landscape. Obelisks are the ultimate statement of ancient Egyptian ambition, single pieces of red granite carved into needles that pierced the sky. To create one, workers first had to perform a kind of stone surgery in the quarries of Aswan. They would carve deep grooves along the intended fracture line, then drive wooden wedges into these channels. But the real genius was what came next. They would soak the dry wood with water. As the wedges absorbed the moisture, they expanded with immense, irresistible force, cleanly splitting the granite from the bedrock. This method produced obelisks of staggering scale, some weighing more than 400 tons. That is heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet. The unfinished obelisk still lying in the Aswan quarry is a frozen moment in this process, a monument to a challenge that was almost too great. Once freed, the real logistical nightmare began. How do you move a 400-ton stone needle hundreds of miles down the Nile? The solution was a combination of brute force and brilliant physics. The obelisk was likely dragged on a massive wooden sledge, a task that would have required hundreds of laborers pulling on ropes. To reduce friction, a team of workers would have constantly poured water onto the path ahead of the sledge, turning the sand into a slick mud that acted as a lubricant. This transformed a near-impossible drag into a manageable, if still Herculean, pull. For the river journey, the obelisk was loaded onto a specially built, enormous barge. These vessels were feats of naval architecture in their own right, designed to be stable enough to carry such a top-heavy, colossal load without capsizing. The final act was the most perilous of all, the erection. Imagine the scene, a massive stone obelisk lying on its side at the base of a ramp, its tip pointing toward a prepared stone pedestal. Teams of workers would have hauled on ropes, slowly inching the giant up the earthen ramp, its base sliding forward until it dropped into a waiting foundation hole. The precision required here was absolute. A single misstep, one rope snapping, and the priceless monument would shatter into a million pieces. To raise something so immense and set it perfectly vertical without cranes or modern machinery was a triumph of collective human effort and engineering intuition. It was a declaration that their will could not just move mountains but stand them on their ends. Yet for all the permanence of their carved stone and preserved bodies, the Egyptians also needed a way to make their ink last just as long. Their solution was a deceptively simple formula that has defied time itself: carbon black ink. While other ancient cultures used inks made from organic materials like berries or sepia from cuttlefish, which could fade to brown or vanish entirely over centuries, the Egyptians created something far more resilient. Their recipe was a masterful blend of three basic ingredients: soot, gum, and water. The soot, collected from the smoky residue of burning oils or resins, provided the deep, pure black pigment. This was then mixed with a binding agent, usually gum arabic from the acacia tree, which held the pigment in suspension and helped it adhere perfectly to the papyrus surface. A little water was added to create the perfect flowing consistency for a scribe's reed brush. The genius of this formula lies in its chemistry. Carbon, the primary element in soot, is one of the most stable substances on Earth. It does not react easily with air or moisture, meaning it resists fading and chemical change. The gum arabic binder was equally important, locking that stable carbon onto the papyrus fibers without cracking or flaking off. This is why the texts on the papyrus of Ani or the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb remain so starkly black and readable after more than 3,000 years. They were not just writing things down, they were engineering their records for eternity. This permanent ink was the final, crucial link in their information revolution. It meant a tax record, a medical prescription, or a royal decree would remain as legible for a future administrator as it was for the scribe who first penned it. In a civilization built on the power of the written word, this durable black ink was the ultimate guarantee that their words and their world would never be forgotten. That same durable ink recorded voyages that stretched the very map of the known world, journeys made possible by ships of incredible sophistication. The Egyptians were not just river sailors confined to the predictable currents of the Nile. They were master shipwrights who built ocean-going vessels from cedar planks, locked together with a joinery technique so strong it would define naval architecture for centuries. This was the mortise and tenon joint. Instead of simply lashing planks together with rope, which could flex and leak in rough seas, Egyptian builders would cut a small, rectangular socket, the mortise, into the edge of one plank. Then they would shape a matching protrusion, the tenon, on the edge of the adjoining plank. These pieces were then hammered together, forming a tight, interlocking wooden puzzle. The entire hull was essentially a single, rigid, monolithic structure. To make it completely watertight, they would caulk the seams with reed fibers and pitch. The result was a ship that was both flexible enough to ride the waves and strong enough to withstand the open ocean. These were not small boats. We know from reliefs carved for Queen Hatshepsut that her fleet included massive vessels, perhaps nearly 100 feet long, with huge crescent-shaped sails and dozens of oarsmen. These were the ships that made the legendary expedition to the land of Punt, a trading mission that sailed down the Red Sea to what is likely modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. Imagine these ships heavily laden with trade goods venturing far from the sight of land. They were not just carrying trinkets, they returned with living myrrh trees to be replanted in Egypt, along with gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal skins. This was not a raid, it was a state-sponsored commercial and diplomatic enterprise, a true exchange of cultures. These advanced ships turned the Mediterranean and the Red Sea into highways, not barriers. They brought back wealth that fueled the Egyptian economy and ideas that enriched its culture, proving that some of the most powerful technologies are those that build connections between distant worlds. That same ingenuity that built ocean-going ships was also applied to protecting what lay behind a simple wooden door. The ancient Egyptians invented the world's first pin-tumbler lock, a security device so effective its basic principle still secures our homes today. Picture a large wooden bolt slid across the inside of a door. The key to its security was a series of vertical pins that dropped down into matching holes in this bolt, effectively locking it in place. From the outside, there was no handle to turn or latch to lift. The only way to open it was through a key, but not a flat, modern key. The Egyptian key was a large, toothbrush-shaped wooden tool with several pegs sticking up from one end. To unlock the door, you would slide this key into a slot beneath the bolt. As you pushed it in, the specific pegs on the key would align perfectly with the locking pins inside. Lifting the key upward would raise all the pins simultaneously, just high enough to clear the bolt. With the pins disengaged, you could then slide the bolt open. This mechanism was a brilliant piece of practical engineering. It transformed security from a simple barricade into an intricate puzzle that only the right key could solve. For the first time, personal property and valuable goods stored in rooms and chests could be protected by something more than a guard's watchful eye. This was a profound shift in thinking, moving the responsibility for security from a person to a mechanism. The concept of a unique key that matched a unique lock meant that access could be controlled and limited with precision. This ancient invention laid the foundational idea for every mechanical lock that followed, from medieval castles to the deadbolt on your own front door. It reminds us that some of the most enduring technologies are not always the most monumental, but the ones that quietly, reliably guard our private worlds. While their wooden keys secured private treasures, another rotating invention was reshaping the public world one vessel at a time. The potter's wheel arrived in Egypt as a simple turntable, but they refined it into a tool of mass production. The fundamental design was a spinning stone or wooden disc mounted on a central axle. A potter would place a lump of clay in the center of this spinning platform, and with wet hands use the centrifugal force to pull the clay upward into a perfectly symmetrical shape. This was a dramatic leap from hand coiling, where pots were built slowly from rolled ropes of clay. The wheel did not just make pots rounder, it made them faster, stronger, and more uniform. A single skilled potter could now produce in an hour what might have taken a day using older methods. This was the ancient equivalent of an industrial revolution for everyday objects. Suddenly, the efficient creation of storage jars for grain, oil, and wine was possible on a staggering scale. Cooking pots, water jugs, and ceremonial vessels for temples could be produced not as rare, handcrafted items but as standardized goods. This shift supported a burgeoning urban population that no longer had to produce everything for itself. a complex economy could now rely on specialized potters who supplied entire cities with durable, affordable containers. This was the infrastructure of a civilization built not on stone but on clay. It enabled the storage and trade of surplus food, the distribution of goods across vast distances, and the very organization of a society that was growing in both size and complexity. The humble potter's wheel, spinning in workshops across the land, was quietly building the container that held the Egyptian world together. The same cedar ships that mastered the open ocean first proved their worth on the winding currents of the Nile, and their secret was a simple yet revolutionary piece of fabric. The Egyptians were pioneers of sail technology, transforming a river into a two-way highway. They did not just use the wind, they engineered a way to defy the very flow of the water. The Nile's current always runs from south to north, but the prevailing winds blow almost constantly from the north to the south. This created a perfect natural system, but only if you could master both elements. Their solution was a massive, rectangular sail mounted on a single, sturdy mast. When traveling north, downstream with the current, they could simply lower the sail and let the river carry them. But the real innovation was the journey south, upstream against the current. By hoisting that broad sail, they could catch the northerly wind and be pushed upriver, effectively sailing against the flow. This was not a passive process. The rigging was designed for adjustment, with ropes that allowed the crew to precisely angle the sail to catch the wind most efficiently. They could tack, sailing in a zigzag pattern to make headway even if the wind was not directly behind them. This harnessed wind power changed the entire economy of movement. Before the sail, moving heavy goods like stone blocks or giant obelisks upriver required immense teams of men and animals straining on towpaths along the bank. It was slow, exhausting, and limited by the geography of the shoreline. With a sail catching the wind, a single ship could carry hundreds of tons of cargo upstream with a fraction of the human labor. A journey that might have taken weeks of brutal, back-breaking toil could now be accomplished in days with a skilled crew. This was the birth of efficient, large-scale logistics. Grain from the fertile south could be reliably shipped to storage granaries in the north. Limestone from northern quarries could be transported south for temple construction. The entire nation, from Abu Simbel to the Delta, was woven together by these wind-driven vessels. The sail did not just move boats, it moved an empire, proving that the greatest power sometimes lies not in fighting nature, but in learning to ride its currents. Their mastery of fire and chemistry gave the world its first true glass. While other cultures used natural volcanic glass, the Egyptians pioneered a method to create it from scratch, a dazzling alchemy of sand and flame. This was the core form technique, a process of beautiful intricacy. It began with a simple clay core shaped like the interior of the desired vessel, perhaps a small perfume bottle or a cosmetic jar. This clay form was then attached to a long metal rod. The artisan would heat this core until it was scorching hot, then carefully roll it over fragments of raw glass which would melt and stick to the surface. They worked like a sculptor, but with molten crystal, building up the vessel layer by layer. While the glass was still soft and pliable, they would roll it on a smooth stone slab called a marva to smooth the surface. This was when the real magic happened. To create the vibrant patterns we associate with Egyptian glass, they would trail threads of differently colored, molten glass onto the base layer. Then, using a pointed tool, they would comb and feather these threads, dragging them into mesmerizing swirls and waves. The final object was then slowly cooled in a special oven, a process called annealing, to prevent the glass from cracking from thermal stress. The last step revealed the final secret. Once the glass vessel was completely cool and solid, the artisan would scrape out the brittle clay core from the inside, leaving behind a hollow, brilliantly colored container. Their chemical knowledge was staggering. They knew which minerals to add to the silica sand to achieve specific, vibrant colors. Cobalt produced a deep, rich blue that perfectly imitated precious lapis lazuli. Copper created an opaque turquoise and manganese gave them a royal purple. They were not just making glass, they were engineering synthetic gemstones. This allowed those who could not afford rare, imported stones to possess objects of breathtaking beauty. A simple glass bead necklace could shimmer with the colors of the pharaohs, and a cosmetic jar could hold precious oils in a vessel as beautiful as its contents. This was luxury democratized by chemistry, a testament to their belief that beauty was a necessity worthy of the most advanced technology they could devise. That vibrant glass captured light, but it was a tool of hardened wood and muscle that truly harnessed the power of the sun. The Egyptian plow transformed the very earth beneath their feet. After the Nile's annual flood receded, it left behind a vast plain of incredibly fertile silt, but also a surface baked hard by the sun, cracked and difficult to penetrate. Breaking this ground with simple hand hoes was a slow, punishing task that limited how much land a single family could farm. The plow changed everything. It was a simple but robust wooden frame, often with a bronze or fire-hardened tip pulled by a team of oxen. A farmer would guide the handles, steering the share through the sun-baked soil, slicing a clean furrow. With oxen providing the power, what once took a family weeks of back-breaking labor could now be accomplished in a matter of days. This was a monumental leap in efficiency. The deep turning action of the plow did more than just break up the ground. It aerated the soil, bringing nutrients to the surface and burying weeds, which would decompose and further enrich the earth. This created the perfect seedbed for crops like emmer wheat and barley, leading to a dramatic surge in yields. A single farm could now produce a massive surplus of grain. This surplus was the invisible foundation of everything we associate with ancient Egypt. It meant that not every person had to be a farmer. This agricultural efficiency freed up a vast labor force to become the artisans who carved hieroglyphs, the scribes who managed bureaucracy, the priests who performed rituals, and the armies of workers who built the pyramids and temples. Without the plow, there would have been no surplus. Without that surplus, there would have been no civilization. This humble technology, drawn by oxen across the fields, was the quiet, steady engine that powered 3,000 years of pharaonic glory, proving that some of the most world-altering revolutions begin not with a shout, but with the quiet rip of a furrow in the soil. The plow carved time into the seasons, but the sun carved hours directly into the day. Under the relentless Egyptian sky, the sundial turned sunlight itself into a clock. Its design was an exercise in beautiful simplicity, a flat, marked stone base with a raised bar, the gnomon, set at one end. As the sun journeyed across the heavens, the gnomon's shadow would sweep across the dial, its tip pointing to lines that divided the daylight into 12 equal parts. This was not a single, universal time, but a flexible measure of daylight itself. An hour in the long days of summer was actually longer than an hour in the short days of winter, a system perfectly adapted to the rhythm of the sun. This elegant device brought order to the chaos of the day. For the first time, a priest knew precisely when to make the midday offering to the gods. A foreman overseeing a crew of pyramid builders could announce a break for the 6th hour with absolute authority. Scribes in the vast government offices could coordinate their work, starting and stopping their records at appointed times. The sundial transformed the abstract passage of the sun into a tangible, shared schedule. It was a fundamental shift in human consciousness, moving from simply reacting to the sun's position to actively segmenting and managing its light. This was the true beginning of the measured hour, a concept so ingrained in our modern lives that we rarely stop to consider its origins in a stone slab and a shadow. The principles of leverage and the inclined plane became the invisible hands that raised a civilization from the desert floor. While we marvel at the finished pyramids, the true technological triumph lies in the colossal temporary landscapes built to construct them. The Egyptians did not possess magic, they understood physics. Their primary tool was the ramp, a massive earthen causeway built from mud brick, limestone chippings, and desert debris. These were not small slopes, but gigantic engineered roadways that grew alongside the pyramid, winding their way up its flanks. As the pyramid rose higher, the ramp was extended and its base widened to maintain a stable, gentle incline. This allowed teams of laborers to drag stones weighing many tons on wooden sledges, slowly, methodically, inching them upward to their destined place. The genius was in the ramp's angle. A slope that was too steep would make the load impossible to pull, while one that was too shallow would require an impossibly long and voluminous ramp. They found the perfect balance, a gradient that transformed an impossible vertical lift into a manageable, sustained horizontal pull. But once a stone reached its general position, a different tool took over for the final, delicate placement. This is where the lever revealed its power. Workers would slide sturdy wooden poles under the stone's edge. Using a smaller rock as a fulcrum, a team could apply downward pressure on the long end of the lever. This would create a mechanical advantage, multiplying their force just enough to lift one corner of the multi-ton block. They could then slip wooden shims or gravel underneath to hold it at the new height. By repeating this process, alternating sides and patiently adjusting, they could nudge the colossal block with centimeter precision, setting it perfectly level and perfectly aligned with its neighbors. This was not brute force, it was applied physics on a monumental scale. The ramp and the lever, two of the simplest machines ever conceived, became the essential partners in this epic construction. One provided the sheer power of sustained ascent, while the other offered the delicate touch of final adjustment. Together, they turned an army of workers into a single, precise machine, capable of assembling a mountain of stone, one perfectly placed block at a time. That same precision in placement was guided by a hidden world of numbers and ratios. The ancient Egyptians were not just master builders, they were mathematical geniuses whose calculations are literally set in stone. Their number system was a decimal one based on powers of 10, but they expressed fractions in a uniquely elegant way. They understood all fractions as sums of unit fractions, fractions with a numerator of 1. So instead of writing 2/5, they would write 1/3 plus 1/15. This might seem cumbersome, but it provided a standardized way to divide things like loaves of bread or portions of grain with perfect fairness, a critical need for a vast state bureaucracy. Their mathematical prowess went far beyond simple division. They had a grasp of abstract principles we still use today, including the concept of the square root. The Rhind Mathematical Papyrus, a 3,600-year-old textbook, contains a problem asking for the square root of 16, which they correctly solved as 4. This was not theoretical math for its own sake. It was the essential toolkit for the architects of the impossible. Their most brilliant architectural innovation was the seek. This was a precise ratio that defined the slope of a pyramid's sides. The seeked was the horizontal distance a pyramid face would retreat for every single unit of vertical rise. If an architect chose a seeked of 5¼ palms, it meant for every cubit the pyramid rose upward, the face would slope inward by 5¼ palms. This single, elegant ratio allowed a master builder to communicate the exact angle for the entire massive structure to hundreds of foremen and work crews, ensuring perfect consistency from the base to the capstone. This advanced geometry was not confined to the desert plateau at Giza. Every year, the Nile's flood would wipe away the boundary markers between farmers' fields. When the waters receded, teams of surveyors, known as rope stretchers, would arrive with their coiled measuring ropes knotted at precise intervals. Using their knowledge of geometry, especially the 3-4-5 right triangle method, they could re-establish perfect square boundaries and calculate the area of each plot of land. This was practical math on a national scale, ensuring taxes were fair and disputes were minimized. The same principles that laid out a farmer's field also oriented a temple to the stars and determined the sacred slope of a pharaoh's final resting place. Their entire civilization was, in a very real sense, built upon a foundation of numbers. a hidden architecture of calculation that gave order to their world, from the flooded fields of the Nile to the timeless peaks of the pyramids. The hidden architecture of numbers that ordered their fields and temples also demanded a system to protect it all from chaos. This need gave rise to the world's first organized police force, the Magi. They began not as officers of the law, but as formidable Nubian mercenaries, renowned for their military skill and loyalty. Over time, the Egyptian state recognized the value of these disciplined warriors and transformed their role entirely. They evolved from foreign fighters into a professional domestic security force, a true technology of social control. Their duties were vast and vital. A Magi unit might be stationed at a remote desert outpost, watching the horizon for raiders and protecting the valuable trade caravans that were the empire's lifeblood. In the bustling cities, they were the guardians of order, patrolling the streets to prevent theft and violence. Their most sacred trust, however, was the protection of the state's heart and soul. They stood guard at the entrances to colossal temples, ensuring the sanctity of rituals and the security of vast treasuries filled with gold and offerings. They were the watchmen of the necropolises, the men tasked with protecting the eternal resting places of pharaohs and nobles from the ever-present threat of tomb robbers. This was not a disorganized militia. The Magi operated with a clear hierarchy, a chain of command that reported up through officials to the vizier himself. They had specific precincts and patrol routes, an early form of a beat. This system represents one of humanity's first attempts to institutionalize public safety, to create a permanent body whose sole purpose was the protection of people, property, and the principles of the state. It was a profound innovation in social organization, recognizing that a civilization's greatness depends not just on what it builds, but on how effectively it can guard its achievements from the shadows. Even the most disciplined society needs a voice for its soul, and the ancient Egyptians channeled theirs through instruments of remarkable precision. Among the most sacred was the sistrum, a ceremonial rattle whose sound was believed to appease gods and ward off evil spirits. Its design was a masterclass in early metalworking. A craftsman would begin with a bronze or brass frame, often shaped like a temple gateway or the head of the goddess Hathor. Across this arch, they would thread a series of loose, thin metal wires. The true genius was in the finishing. Each wire was threaded with small, flat metal discs that could slide freely, and the ends were then bent or capped to ensure the discs would never fall off. This was not a simple child's toy. When shaken, the discs would slide and collide along the wires, creating a shimmering, rustling sound, a metallic whisper that was both ethereal and penetrating. This specific timbre was considered the audible essence of divinity, a sound technology designed to cleanse a sacred space and invoke a goddess's presence. But their acoustic artistry did not stop with ritual rattles. They crafted harps from costly imported woods, with sound boxes and curved arms calculated to resonate with deep, melodic tones. They fashioned flutes and even double clarinets from reeds, requiring a player to produce a continuous, droning harmony. The existence of these complex instruments reveals a society with a sophisticated understanding of acoustics. They knew that the length and thickness of a string dictated its pitch, that the volume of an air column inside a flute determined its note. This was physics applied to emotion, engineering in the service of joy and reverence. In their workshops, artisans were not just building objects, they were building moods, crafting the very soundscape of festivals, funerals, and royal processions. It proves that their technological genius was not reserved solely for tombs and temples, but was also dedicated to enriching the experience of life itself, filling their world with a beauty we can still, in a way, hear echoing across the centuries. Even the sounds of ceremony required a physical stage, a body adorned not just with gold but with intricate artistry. In a land of relentless sun and pervasive dust, the ancient Egyptians engineered a solution for personal grooming that was both profoundly practical and deeply fashionable: the wig. This was far more than a simple hairpiece. It was a complex wearable technology. Artisans constructed wigs on a foundation of fine netting, a delicate mesh that sat comfortably on the scalp. Onto this net, they would meticulously knot thousands of strands, not only of human hair, but also sheep's wool and even date palm fibers, carefully dyed with plant extracts to achieve the desired shade. The most elaborate designs featured hundreds of tight, tiny braids, all woven together into a single, heavy garment for the head. But why would a society famous for its depictions of lush, black hair choose to shave their heads and wear wigs instead? The reasons were rooted in hygiene and comfort. A shaved head was easy to keep clean, free from sweat and dust in the hot climate, and most importantly, it was the best possible defense against lice and other parasites. The wig then acted as a protective shell, shielding the sensitive, bare scalp from the sun's intense rays while allowing for airflow through its netted base. This practical foundation, however, became a canvas for high fashion. To style these creations, Egyptian artisans used beeswax as a kind of ancient styling gel. They would warm the wax and apply it to the strands, sculpting intricate patterns, holding braids in place, and adding a lustrous sheen. This use of a natural, pliable material reveals a sophisticated understanding of material science, knowing just how to manipulate a substance to achieve both hold and beauty. The existence of specialized wig workshops and the variety of styles, from the short, curly styles for everyday wear to the long, layered, perfumed wigs for nobility, points to a fully developed beauty industry. A person's wig was a clear signal of their status and occasion, a technological marvel that proved even the most personal aspects of life were worthy of innovation, blending biology, chemistry, and art into a single, stunning expression of identity. The artistry of the wig was matched by a material that shimmered with the colors of the Nile and the sky. The Egyptians invented faience, a stunning ceramic that was not made from clay at all. This was a different kind of alchemy, a technology for creating objects that glowed with their own inner light. The process began not with mud from the riverbank, but with crushed quartz, sand, or even ground-up pebbles. This fine powder was the core of the material. To this base, they would add a small amount of lime and plant ash, and then the magic ingredient, a mineral like copper. The copper was the key to the color, promising the deep blues and vibrant turquoise greens that the Egyptians cherished. They would mix these dry ingredients with just enough water to form a paste, a kind of wet quartz dough that could be molded by hand or pressed into carved molds. A craftsman could shape this paste into a tiny amulet to ward off evil, a protective scarab beetle for a mummy's wrappings, or one of the many shabti figures, the miniature servants who would work for the deceased in the afterlife. But the true technological miracle happened in the kiln. As the fire heated the molded object, something extraordinary occurred. The minerals on the surface, the copper and the plant ash, would melt first, forming a thin, glassy layer. At the same time, the crushed quartz body would begin to sinter, its particles fusing together without fully melting. This created a strong, porous core. The molten glaze would then be drawn to the surface by capillary action, like water soaking up through a paper towel, coating the entire object in a brilliant, self-generated skin of glass. This was a self-glazing ceramic. They did not paint a glaze on, they made the material create its own. The result was a bead, a figurine, or a tile that was intensely colorful, durable, and had a beautiful vitreous luster that imitated precious stones like turquoise and lapis lazuli. This made the beauty and protective power of rare gems accessible to nearly everyone, from a farmer buying a simple blue amulet to a pharaoh lining an entire chamber with dazzling faience tiles. This ancient innovation was more than just decoration. It was a direct chemical precursor to glassmaking itself, a brilliant first step in humanity's long journey to master the transformation of sand into light and color. The echoes of Egyptian genius did not fade with the fall of the pharaohs. Instead, their innovations traveled, carried by trade and conquest to become the foundational stones for the classical world and ultimately our own. The Greeks, who stood in awe of Egypt's ancient wisdom, absorbed their mathematical and astronomical principles. The great library of Alexandria became a repository for this knowledge, where scholars pored over Egyptian texts on geometry and medicine. The Romans, practical builders themselves, looked to the Nile for inspiration. They adopted and adapted the Egyptian mastery of hydraulic cement, scaling it up to create the concrete that built their aqueducts, the Colosseum, and the Pantheon. The Roman aqueduct itself is a direct descendant of the Egyptian understanding of water management and gravity-fed systems, principles first tested in the irrigation canals along the Nile. Even the administrative machinery of the Roman Empire, with its census and grain doles, mirrors the bureaucratic precision first enabled by Egyptian papyrus and hieroglyphic record-keeping. Their concept of measured time, encoded in the water clock and the 365-day solar calendar, became the ticking heart of Western civilization, a rhythm we still live by today. We see their legacy not as a collection of museum pieces, but as living ideas. The modern surgeon stitching a wound employs the same logical process of diagnosis and treatment outlined in the Edwin Smith papyrus. The engineer calculating the stress on a beam uses mathematical principles of proportion and geometry that Egyptian architects used to keep their pyramids standing. The very notion that a problem, whether it is moving a 400-ton stone or preserving a human body, can be solved through observation, experimentation, and applied physics is perhaps their greatest gift to us. They demonstrated that ingenuity is not born from magic, but from a relentless practical curiosity about the world. This was a civilization that looked at a desert and saw a kingdom, at a river and saw a clock, and at the human body and saw a machine worthy of repair. Their true monument is not just the stone that remains, but the invisible architecture of thought they left behind, a blueprint for building the modern world. From the plow that tamed the desert to the lock that secured a home, these 25 innovations reveal a civilization of profound practical genius. The ancient Egyptians were far more than tomb builders. They were the original scientists, engineers, and inventors whose solutions shaped the very bedrock of our modern world. They looked at a challenge, whether it was telling time at night or moving a mountain of stone, and they engineered an answer with nothing more than observation, intellect, and a relentless drive to improve the human condition. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that true ingenuity is timeless, springing not from magic, but from the curious and determined human mind. So we turn the question to you: what ancient technology amazes you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe for more mysteries from history.